Hey everyone, I'm Craig Hazen. JP Moreland will be up here in a few minutes. Good to be here. Now, some of you look a little tired. Were you up late? Were you up late? Oh my goodness. So I pick up JP Moreland. We're going to the airport, right? And he says, I'm really tired, And I go, why? He goes, I was up late watching the Royals. Can you imagine? He's from Kansas City. He meant the baseball team. I guess it was extra innings, Terrible. Oh. Yeah, special greetings from Biola University. Yeah, it's a big Biola contingent up here. Yeah, the people who cheered, their kids got financial aid. That's, I know that goes. Oh my goodness. Okay, so I'm on my way to this Sacramento suburb, right? And I check the weather report. And there's some red warning about bears. Do you have bears here? You don't, do you? Maybe they mean over in the mountains or something, right? Yeah, okay, Auburn. Oh, Auburn has bears? Maybe it's just up the street. I don't know. So here's what it says. The Forest Service has issued a bear warning in this region. They're urging everyone to protect themselves by carrying pepper spray and wearing bells. Is this something you do? Oh my gosh. In fact, it says campers should be alert for signs of fresh bear activity, and they should be able to tell the difference between black bear dung and grizzly bear dung. You don't? It helps, okay? In case you're unfamiliar with it, it says black bear dung is rather small and round. Sometimes you can see fruit seeds and or squirrel fur in it. Grizzly bear dung, on the other hand, has bells in it and smells like pepper spray. I don't know. It was on the internet. Well, so glad you're here. Anytime we go to a region where, 400 or 500 people turn out to hear a bunch of pointy-headed Christian philosophers, we know something is going right in the world, Especially on a Friday night with all of you being so tired from watching the wedding and so on. But I just want to give a few announcements and tell you what we're going to be doing this weekend and then turn it over to our first round of speakers. If you have your program, pull that out. Well, I'll walk you through it very quickly. This is lovely. I don't know who created that. Probably somebody in my office. Reasonable faith in an uncertain world. The sponsors are right on the front. Biola University, Bridgeway Church, of course. Apologetics guy. And you ought to write down his website, apologeticsguy.com. And then another apologetics, apologetics.com proper, right? And we've got some other wonderful groups out there. Reasonable faith is starting up, and there's reasons to believe. There's just reasons everywhere this weekend. If you open it up to the first couple of pages, as you can see tonight, we're going to have a little bit of a kickoff session with myself and JP Moreland. We'll have a little break, keep you awake, and then bring in Clay Jones on why God allows evil. This is dynamite stuff. You probably haven't heard a presentation quite like this, and I think it will be delightful. It's theologically and biblically rich. And it's funny because people coming into a philosophy apologetics conference like this aren't necessarily thinking theology and Bible directly, but Clay Jones weaves it all together. You don't want to miss that. So we'll send you home for a great night's sleep when Clay is done. And then tomorrow morning, very early on at 8 a.m., this is for the hardy among you. And I hope you're all hardy because you don't want to miss these wonderful breakout sessions by Harry Edwards, the founder of apologetics.com, Lindsay Brooks, and Paul Hughes, who partner with Harry in that wonderful ministry. All of them are on the radio on a regular basis. They have some wonderful books on their table. Go visit them and gobble all of it up. In fact, if you buy their books, the proceeds will go to needy children. Theirs. In fact, there are some children out there behind the table. Those would be the needy ones. Okay, so check out their table. All right. Tomorrow morning, then there will be a break, and then I'll come back and I'll do a session on evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. I think you'll find this interesting. There's a lot of evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. Some people walk around thinking that it's really just a matter of blind leaping. I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised to think that, to understand that we've got the goods on this. We'll take a break, and Mikel Del Rosario, who really is the mastermind of this little project this evening, we'll come back to talk about using stories and illustrations in defending the faith. We'll have a break, and then J.P. Moreland will anchor the whole morning at 11:20 with Christianity and the Nature of Science. Again, another no-miss operation. If you turn to like pages 4 and 5, you'll see a bunch of resources. One thing we don't want to do is get up here and throw a bunch of ideas at you and then have you run out with nothing for follow-up. There are lots of resources. Some of our very best lectures, some of our very best books are out on the table. Buy them by the armloads because we might not be up here again soon. And I think you will find that you can get a full or apologetics education from a lot of the material out there on the table. And they do accept credit cards. So in case you're wondering if we're a real operation, they take credit cards. Let me highlight one thing. It's the conference set. The folks at the table out there put together some things, and they're really experts on the materials. And there's 4 items in this set, and I guess the whole thing goes for $45. So probably retails for $750 or something. So I'm guessing you're getting a good deal. The first book in the set is J.P. Moreland's The God Question. This is a wonderful book. Philosophically rich, but it has this personal touch all the way through it. And to get a brilliant guy like J.P. Moreland to boil it down to the personal in his philosophical writing is tough to do. But this is the kind of book you actually want to get into the hands of any thoughtful atheist, agnostic, or person who's struggling with doubt. So check that one out. It's actually part of the set. It contains a book that I've written called 5 Sacred Crossings. I'm really happy with this. This is a book people actually read. Oh my goodness. You know, those of us who are academics, often we write books that are called scholarly monographs, which really translates into the only people buying them are research libraries. And then the research librarian takes it, they catalog it, and they bring it to the darkest and dankest part of the library. And there they shelve it, never to be seen again, you know? So to have a book that people actually read is really fun. This is a novel. It's a fast-paced novel with a terrorist subplot, but it weaves in some of my favorite apologetics ideas, and I've just been delighted. In fact, some people buy it, like when they go to conferences, they buy it on Friday night, and they come back the next morning going, I loved it. I go, wait a minute. You didn't read J.P. Moreland's or William Lane Craig's book overnight, you know. So you get the picture. It's a novel. It's fast-paced. It's fun, and if... I was about to highlight Clay Jones' CD set on why God allows evil. I think you'll like his presentation so much that you'll want the whole 2.5-hour presentation. That's part of the package. And then a wonderful DVD. This is Does God Exist? It's a debate between Dr. William Lane Craig, one of our professors in the apologetics program at Biola, and Christopher Hitchens. Christopher Hitchens is one of the most vocal new atheists on the planet today. And Christopher Hitchens normally does very well in debates. We set up a debate between William Lane Craig and Christopher Hitchens on the Biola campus about 2 years ago. And, well, let me put it this way. The atheist blogs were writing after the event, Christopher Hitchens lost handily. He was spanked like an errant schoolboy. It was powerful. So, in fact, I actually think that debate was like the beginning of the downfall of the new atheism. So check that out. That all comes together in the package. And you can see the other resources on those pages. You'll see things about the Apologetics Master of Arts degree. There's a number of people in the room tonight who have an MA degree in Christian apologetics from Biola University. And the reason they're doing it and they live up here is because we have a first-ranked distance learning program. And this isn't some second-rate thing. This is a first-rank academic degree through distance learning. In fact, the dirty little secret on our campus is that our Master of Arts degree through distance might be more educationally robust and fun and accessible than our on-campus degree program of the same nature. So check that out. And we also have an MA degree in science and religion for those of you who are engineering types and medical professionals and so on. Check those out. In fact, there's some flyers out on the table that look like this that describe the nature of the programs. I think you will really like them. So check that out. For those of you who already have 3 master's degrees and a couple of doctorates and you don't want to do another one, I really do encourage you to think about our certificate program in Christian apologetics. It's accessible to everybody. We've got people from grade school to people with PhDs doing the certificate program in Christian apologetics, and that is described on page 7. The rest of the pages are for your notes. There's some helpful outlines and charts and so on. And then at the back page, you'll see just a brief descriptor of our MA degree in Christian apologetics. All right. That's all I've got. Let me get the party started by introducing, yet again, Dr. J.P. Moreland. He's the Distinguished Professor of Philosophy at the Talbot School of Theology at Biola University. And he's a dear man. Not only is he super smart, but he is one of the greatest encouragers in the Christian faith I have ever met. And so he's the real deal in every pocket. Dr. J.P. Moreland, look forward to hearing what you have to say.
He smells like pepper spray. What is that? You be the judge. Wonderful to be with you. We're looking forward to this weekend, and we're really gratified that so many of you decided to come and spend this time with us, and we hope it'll be well worth your time. A few years ago, I was in the Seattle airport coming back on a Sunday morning from a speaking engagement that I'd done there on a Friday and Saturday, much like this one. And I picked up a copy of the Seattle Times newspaper and made a beeline for the editorial page. And there, on the front page, the lead editorial, which actually covered 3/4 of the front page and spilled over into a half of another page, that's a big editorial, was a syndicated editorial entitled "A Divided Nation." The author claimed that we now live in the most divided period in the history of America since the Civil War. Now, I actually think he's right about that. I think that we are a divided people in the United States by and large. What really caught my eye was his claim about what fundamentally divides us. He said the fundamental divisions among the American people fall into 2 camps, and those camps are divided not primarily politically, not primarily racially, not primarily by way of gender, and not primarily socioeconomically. Now that was interesting to me because I thought he was going to say the fundamental division was political or one of the others on that list. He said the fundamental thing that divides the American people into 2 camps is a division about worldview. Worldview. Now, we've been talking about worldview for a long time, but you very seldom hear anybody discuss worldview on ABC or CNN or Fox News or even talk radio. There are a couple of exceptions to that. But I found it absolutely fascinating that a syndicated editorial in a major newspaper was claiming that the American people are divided into 2 different camps by way of worldview. Now, the author was a political scientist, and he was not a philosopher, and he was actually wrong about the number of divisions that are current in our culture. And I'm going to explain in a little bit that there are really 3 worldviews that are fighting for allegiance. But his point was that worldview thinking is absolutely critical to understanding what's happening in politics or in the universities or in the media, in the arts and entertainment industry, and so on. Now, a worldview, for our purposes, is just the sum total of what you believe about what really matters. So your worldview would be everything you believe about what really matters. So Christianity is a worldview, atheism, Marxism, these would be worldviews. Now, we live in the first period in the history of Western culture since the time of Jesus, where Christianity is not only considered to be irrational, it is also today considered to be immoral. There was a long time, I can remember in the 60s, where many people would claim that Christianity was a superstition, that it wasn't reasonable to believe it, and so on. That's been around a while. But it hasn't been until since the, I'd say, late 80s, where Christianity is now not only regarded as irrational and a superstition, but it is actually considered to be positively immoral to practice the teachings of the New Testament and the Bible. If you follow the religion of Jesus, you are a bigot and an intolerant, not only ignorant, but a bigot. Now, recently, a novelist named Jane Smiley made the following statement about us who are Bible-believing Christians, when she said, "Here is how their ignorance and their bigotry works. First, they," that's we, "put the fear of God into you. If you don't believe in the literal word of the Bible, you'll burn in hell." Of course, the literal word of the Bible is tremendously contradictory, and so you have to abdicate all critical thinking and accept a simple but logical system of belief that is dangerous to question. A corollary to this point is that we, make sure you understand that the devil resides in the toils and snares of complex thought, so it's best not to try to think at all. Now, that is the image of our community that is portrayed throughout a good portion of the culture. And our own leaders, without intending to do so, have reinforced this idea. How many of you ever watch Fox News? Last night on Bill O'Reilly's Factor, Franklin Graham was on. I'm a big fan of Billy Graham's, and I'm a big fan of Franklin Graham's. I think he's a godly man, a good leader, and he's doing a good work for the kingdom. But he was on to talk about hell, and Bill O'Reilly asked him, "Do you actually think there's a hell?" And he said, "I certainly do. Jesus had a lot to say about hell." Well, O'Reilly said, "Well, what about people who don't get a chance to hear about Jesus?" And Franklin Graham, "And what about little children who die who've never heard the name of Jesus?" Well, Franklin Graham began to cite John 3:16 to Bill O'Reilly. Pretty unhelpful. O'Reilly said, "Wait a minute, don't quote the Bible at me. You have to use reason as well." And Franklin Graham said, "No, you have to accept this by faith." Now, I don't know the man, but I will tell you, after 43 years of ministry, when someone says that you have to accept this by faith, it is often an excuse for laziness and not having done your homework. And we have a lot of leaders that are leading our community that stand up with a microphone in front of people and use the faith card as an excuse for not knowing an answer to a question. And what I want to suggest to you is that that is what our culture has tended to portray. And I want to say again, I'm a fan of the Graham family and Franklin Graham. I'm a fan of his. He was not unusual in this regard, but do you understand that over time, when our community continues to give an anti-intellectual message to the culture, is it any wonder that they think we're ignorant bigots? Because we tend to come across that way, I hate to say it, when we have an opportunity to speak on behalf of our faith in the public square. Now, I'm going to cheer up here. But I wanted to alert you to the fact that we're not playing games this weekend. This is serious stuff. And what I want to do in the brief time I have the rest of the evening before Dr. Hazen comes to share briefly is I want to give you the three worldviews that are creating this situation. And then I want to try to identify the tension that we are facing today, the fundamental tension that we're facing. There are three worldviews that are dominating the debate in American culture for the hearts and minds of the people in our culture. One of them is ethical monotheism, of which Christianity is the main version. Ethical monotheism would be the view that there is a creator God who gave us the moral law and created us. So conservative Jews like Dennis Prager, who's a talk radio host, and evangelical Christians would agree with ethical monotheism. The main version of ethical monotheism is Christianity. So for our purposes, let's just say the first worldview that is getting the most attention would be historic Christianity as the main version of ethical monotheism. That's good news. The second worldview, which is the dominant worldview in our culture, it has been for a long time. This worldview began to dominate Europe in the middle of the 1800s, and Europe has now become entirely secular because of this worldview, and our culture is heading towards a secularization largely because of this worldview. And the worldview is called scientific naturalism. Scientific naturalism. It has two key ideas to it. And if you're interested in this in more detail, I wrote a book that we've got some here called The Kingdom Triangle, where I've gone into great detail on this. But for our purposes, there are two fundamental commitments to this worldview. The first is that science is the only way that you can know reality. The only way that you can know reality are through the methods of the hard sciences. So that means that physics and chemistry become the ideal way of knowing reality. So if you got up in public and said that a certain kind of antibiotic will help with infection, nobody's going to accuse you of legislating medicine. No, don't push your medicine on me. Whatever's true for you is true for you, and whatever's true for me is true for me. No, because science, medicine, deals with knowledgeable facts. But if you get up and say Jesus is the only way, or get on O'Reilly's show and talk about those who've never heard about the gospel, you're not expressing knowledgeable fact, you're expressing personal faith. So the first commitment of the naturalist is that the only way that you can know reality is through the methods of the hard sciences. It is the scientist who is the gatekeeper in this culture of knowledge. The scientist is the gatekeeper of knowledge. It is no longer the minister who it once was. It is now the scientist. The second commitment of naturalism is the idea that the physical world, therefore, is all there is. The physical world is all there is. So the world allegedly described by chemistry and physics is the only world that's real. It follows that you do not have a mind or a soul. You are your brain and central nervous system, and all of your behaviors are completely determined by your brain chemistry, your genetics, and your environment. You are a machine. You are a computer. That's all you are. There's no soul. There's no mind. There's no free will. You are a determined machine because at the end of the day, you are a very complicated chunk of matter. That's all you are. Why? Because physics and chemistry are the only way we have of knowing something. And the claim that there's a soul is, well, it's a religious claim. It's a religious claim. It's nice for people who believe that kind of thing. So that's the second worldview. The third, and by the way, that worldview dominates a lot of the university, and it dominates the media. Folks, if you look at whom the media calls upon to speak authoritatively, you just watch Dateline, watch 48 Hours. You look at who they parade to speak with authority. It's always scientists. It's scientists that are given the right to tell us what's real. Okay? Now, the third worldview is what I call postmodern relativism. Postmodern relativism. And this is basically the idea that all truth and reality is relative to your community. All truth and reality is relative to your group. Some have pushed it even farther and said that all truth and reality is relative to the individual. The idea is what's real for you and true for you, or what's real and true for your community, say your ethnic community or your religious community, is real and true for you. But what's real and true for someone else is real and true for them. And guess what? There's nobody that's wrong. Because truth is just relative to the individual or his or her group. Now, this worldview called postmodern relativism is widely disseminated in the entertainment industry, in the arts, and in fields like literature, history, and communications. So if you have a grandson or daughter or a child that goes to college, if they're going to major in the humanities outside the field of philosophy, because philosophers don't look very favorably on postmodernism, at least not in America. But if they take a field in the humanities, they're going to be taught postmodernism. One of the reasons we can't get the Supreme Court to treat the Constitution seriously is because a lot of those justices don't believe that there's an actual meaning in the text that you can get to. Instead, they think the text is something that is created by the interpreters. And that's a postmodern idea, that the goal of reading a text is to create the meaning in you, not in the text. And that has real implications for law and politics and so on. Now, these other two worldviews, naturalism and postmodernism, don't like each other, but they do agree about one thing. And here's what they agree about. Guess what it is? They agree that there is no such thing as non-empirical knowledge. They agree that there is no such thing as non-empirical knowledge. Now that was helpful, wasn't it? What's non-empirical knowledge? Knowledge outside your five senses in science. If you can't see it, touch it, taste it, smell it, or hear it, if you can't measure it in the lab and test it and prove it scientifically, you can't know it. What can you do? You can have faith in it if you want, but you can't know it. Hence, a godly man like Franklin Graham will punt from knowledge to faith in a public arena like the Factor. Because our religion is supposed to be about faith. I want to say to you that Christianity is not a religion of faith. It is a religion of knowledge. And the solution to this problem is that the church must recapture its self-understanding or self-image in presenting the Bible as a source not of beliefs, but a source of knowledge of reality. Because the great creeds of Christianity and the central teachings of the Old and New Testaments have always been taken for 2,000 years as providing knowledge, not belief or faith. In fact, if you want a good definition of faith, faith is having confidence in what I know to be true. See, a lot of people will define faith as believing something in the absence of evidence or knowledge. You with me? So that means the more you can know something, the less room there is for faith. I believe that is a contemporary definition of faith that's not biblical. A biblical definition of faith says faith is actually based on knowledge. It's not opposed to it. Do you understand, according to the contemporary definition of faith, which is basically the simple choice to arbitrarily believe something? Do you understand that? Do you see, if that view is true, that if we actually knew that God existed, you couldn't have faith in Him? Because knowledge would eat up the room for faith. Whereas on a more common sense notion, the more you know of God, the more you're able to exercise faith in Him, because faith is based on knowledge. It's not in opposition to knowledge. Christianity is not a faith tradition, it's a knowledge tradition. Alchemy, or the horoscope, is a faith tradition. It is a tradition of ideas that have existed for centuries that you have to accept by faith. The history of chemistry is a knowledge tradition. It is not a history of ideas you have to accept by faith. It's a history of ideas that you can accept on the basis of knowing. Christianity is more like chemistry than it is like the horoscope or something of that sort. So Christianity is a source of knowledge of reality. Now, I don't have time this evening to go into great detail on this. Tomorrow, I hope to spend a little bit more time on it. Again, if you're interested, the Kingdom Triangle goes into this in great depth, biblically and intellectually about the things I'm saying. But I want to make one point about knowledge, and then I'll turn it over to my friend Dr. Hazen for his remarks this evening. You can know something without being certain that you're right. You can know something without having to be certain that you're right. So what exactly is knowledge? Let me give you a simple definition of knowledge. Knowledge is a true belief based on adequate reasons. Knowledge is a true belief based on adequate reasons. If you know something, then you have to believe it. It would make no sense for me to say that I know that there are at least 10 people in this room, but don't tell anybody, but I don't believe a word of it. If you know something, you have to believe what you know. But you can believe something without knowing it. I believe the Chiefs are going to make the playoffs again next year, but I certainly don't know that. Yeah, there you go. That's a good example of faith. I hope you're wrong about that. Okay, so you have to know something, you have to at least believe it. Secondly, if you know something, it has to be true. It has to match reality. And truth is whatever matches reality. Okay? So if I say grass is green, that's true if that matches reality. So if you know something, you have to have a true belief about what it is you know. But, and here's the big point, you could have a true belief without knowing. Suppose that we have a guy named Bill. Down where I live, there's a place called Newport Beach, and there's an outdoor public restroom, and suppose Bill believes everything written on the second stall of the men's room. And he walks in there one day and it says Abraham Lincoln was a president of the United States and E equals MC squared. He doesn't have a clue. He's never studied history. He's never heard of Abraham Lincoln. He doesn't even know what E and M and C stand for. But he believes it. He says, the stall says that settles it. I believe it. And so he looks in there and he actually has a true belief about Lincoln and a true belief about E equals MC squared, but he doesn't have knowledge of those two ideas. Why? Because he doesn't have any good reasons for why he believes them. So you can have truth without knowledge, but you can't have knowledge without truth. You can have truth without knowledge if your belief actually matches the way the world is, but you don't have any good reason to believe it, you just believe it. To know something, you have to have a true belief that's based on adequate reasons. There have to be adequate grounds or reasons for why you believe it. And once a person is furnished with the reasons for a true belief, their true belief gets transformed into knowledge. Now notice I did not define knowledge as a true belief based on conclusive reasons. You could know somebody is guilty in a trial without being 100% sure you're right. Do you understand the evidence could be good enough to where not only do you truly believe the person is guilty, and they are, but you would have enough evidence to where you could say, I actually know that person is guilty, even though the evidence doesn't make it 100% certain. So you could know something without being certain that you're right. For example, the Apostle Paul says in Ephesians 5:5, this I want you to know with certainty. Now, if I said to you, I want a hamburger with pickles, the fact that I have specified I want the hamburger with pickles implies that it's possible to have a hamburger without pickles. If pickles were just parts of hamburgers, I wouldn't have to say, I want a hamburger with pickles, because the pickles would be included. The fact that I say I want a hamburger with pickles means that it's possible to have a hamburger without pickles. When Paul says, I want you to know this with certainty, he implies that it's possible to know something without being certain. Now, when I say that you can know something without being certain, I'm not talking about emotional certainty or spiritual certainty. I'm not recommending that we pray our Father who probably art in heaven. Whether you have emotional or psychological certainty about God's reality or Christianity's truth is often a function of your own personal makeup and the kind of personality type that you have. When I'm talking about you can know something without being certain, I'm using the word in the intellectual sense of it being possible that you're mistaken. Now, what I'm suggesting then is that when I claim that Christianity provides knowledge of God knowledge that there's life after death, and so on. I'm not suggesting that we can know these things with complete 100% certainty so that it's possible, it's totally impossible we're mistaken. It's quite possible to know God is real, but admit, I've got questions about this, or there are things I don't understand, or I have questions I can't answer at this point. That is not inconsistent with genuinely knowing something. By the way, folks, it's quite possible that there are no such things as electrons. But I think that we actually know that electrons are real, even though we might be mistaken about it. Now, I want to conclude then by saying this. We are in a struggle for the hearts and minds of the American people against scientific naturalism and postmodern relativism. These two worldviews agree that there's no such thing as knowledge of reality outside science. You understand that? In that context, we dare not retreat to faith. Because if we proclaim that our views are to be known by faith, we actually become our own grave diggers and we fall into the hands of our enemies, and we actually belie what our people have taught for 2,000 years. Our religion is a religion that is based on knowledge, and it's possible to actually know these things even though we might not be certain of them in the intellectual sense, whatever one says in the spiritual sense of certainty. Now that raises the question of how exactly do we know that God is real and that Christianity is true, that Jesus rose from the dead, and so on. And this is a brief conference, but we'll be touching on some of that the rest of the evening and throughout the day tomorrow. We brought materials for you to look at that might be helpful, but this is not an unimportant conversation for us to be having. Thank you very much.